Hello everybody, welcome to the County Seat today. I'm your host Chad Booth. Today we are looking at the aftermath of the Great American Shakeout, which has just recently taken place. And our point of the discussion is to talk today about earthquake preparedness, not just along the Wasatch Front, but the kinds of impacts it might have and what you can do to be better ready for it across the state. We will talk to our panel of experts in just a few minutes. Right now we're going to get a little background on the shakeout and what people can learn in getting ready for earthquake preparedness.
Not knowing when something bad is going to happen is the very nature of a disaster. But you can practice in a drill like today's Great Shakeout. And practice leads to being prepared.
Events like the Great Shakeout last Thursday are one such drill that helps people practice what to do in an earthquake. Drop, cover, and hold on. These will be the most critical seconds and minutes of the disaster. Surviving the earthquake is paramount, or none of your previous planning will matter.
On June 12th in 1978, I was in Ishinomaki, Japan, and there was a 7.7 earthquake. During the earthquake, a table came sliding across the room and slammed into the wall, and I thought, well, that's a good place to be. And so I went and jumped underneath the table without holding on to the table. And the table immediately headed back across the room the other way with me crawling after it.
Be Ready Utah has prepared a list of 7 steps to help you and your family prepare and survive the big earthquake that is on the horizon here in Utah. First, identify the potential hazards in your home and correct them. These include objects and furniture that must be secured. Second, create a disaster preparedness plan. Know what you're going to do, where you will take cover, and where you and your family will meet after the shaking stops. Third, you will want to prepare your disaster kits. You may have a 72-hour kit, which is a good start. Being prepared to be self-sufficient for a much longer period of time should be the goal.
The subsequent things that happened during the earthquake is that we had no water, we had no power, we had no gas, and no phone. All the utilities were out. And they were out for a significant amount of time. The first thing that came back was the power after 28 days.
Fourth on the list is to identify your home's or building's potential weaknesses and fixing them if you can. Things to consider will be the year your home was built, materials used, and where the home is located. The fifth step is what you will actually do when the earth starts to shake, the most important thing being to drop, cover, and hold on. Step 6 deals with checking on injuries and damage after the earthquake, and Step 7 is to follow your preparedness plan for the days and weeks following the disaster. Preparing for the earthquake doesn't have to be a daunting process. Start or review your plans today at bereadyutah.gov and download this checklist. One last piece of advice, once you have a plan and preparations, review them periodically. You never know what you're going to find.
So we pulled them out of the storage unit and went through them to see what we had, what we didn't have, and see what we need, and found quite a few things that needed some fixing. One of the big things that we noticed was our food. A lot of it was outdated. And also maybe some of the food was things that our kids wouldn't like. The other thing we noticed was we have a big 50-gallon thing for our water, and we moved a few years ago, and we moved with it empty, and it's still empty.
Our primary concern is the preparedness level of the people in general, the public in general. If more people are prepared individually and as families and businesses with emergency plans and emergency supplies and emergency communications plans in place, the better off they will all be. The further our resources will go, and the more people that the state would be able to help.
Being prepared is as much a mindset as actually having a kit that you stow and have ready for when that disaster happens. And being prepared will allow you to protect not only yourself, but perhaps your family and your neighbors. For the County Seat, I'm Derek Dowsett.
Well, that should give you some background. Do you think you're prepared enough? Well, we'll maybe make that a little bit better situation when we come back on the County Seat.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
Mountains to explore. Adventure to be had. A town to fall in love with. Yes, all that in Park City, Utah. Start your adventure at visitparkcity.com.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about earthquake preparedness. Joining us for our conversation are three people that I think will really help us understand that. Ron Harris, who's a professor of geological sciences at BYU. He's our seismology expert. We have Wade Matthews, who is the manager for Be Ready Utah, which is part of the emergency services arm of the state government. And they have a website and run a program to help people be prepared for emergency disasters. And at a more local level, from Sevier County, their emergency services manager, Cody Barton. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess I want to start with just getting our hands around earthquakes a little bit more clearly. Obviously, almost anybody in the state thinks of the Wasatch Fault when they think of a Utah earthquake, and they think of a metropolitan disaster. My question, is that the only place we can shake in Utah? Go ahead.
Well, the two of the four largest earthquakes that have happened in Utah have been in Sevier County.
Really?
In 1901, there was one that was probably magnitude between 6.5 and 7. And in 1921, there were three that were probably magnitude 6s or so. The other two, one was in Hansel Valley, which was like a 6.8, and the other was in Logan. And so there hasn't really been a big earthquake since the pioneers arrived here on the Wasatch Fault.
And yet that's the one we're always so worried about.
That's because there is enough energy stored there to create a magnitude 7 or above.
Ooh, that would sound a little bit scary. How many different places in Utah could an earthquake happen? I remember back in '92 when I worked for Fox News, there was one in Springdale.
Yeah.
Have there been some in Iron County as well?
They happen all over the state, actually. And you're phrasing the question that they could happen in. They do happen in. We actually talk about in our preparedness outreach that earthquakes happen in Utah on average of 700 or 800 earthquakes per year. They're happening all the time, mostly in rural areas where we don't feel them, or they're just such small magnitudes that we don't feel them. So they do happen all over the state, and they are happening all over the state.
Even recently, we've had a few. There was a lot that were mentioned up by Bluffdale, but then there was also some mentioned down along the I-15 corridor. We actually had one that reached a 4.0. It was felt in communities along I-15, and we actually felt it over in Sevier as well, over on the our side of the mountain.
So how high up, the Richter scale is a very confusing thing to people because it's logarithmic in nature, and so you think that a 7 is only one notch up from a 6, but in reality it's like magnitudes worse than a 6.
Well, it's 10 times more amplitude, but it's 32 times more energy when you go one whole number.
Okay, well, that's kind of a sobering, sobering thought.
It grows exponentially.
So if you have a bathtub full of water that represents a magnitude 7, right? Then a magnitude 6 is like a 2.5 gallon bucket out of that, right?
Right.
And then a magnitude 5 would be 1 cup of water out of that 2.5 gallon bucket. And then a magnitude 4 would be 1 teaspoon out of that cup. And a magnitude 3 would be 1 drop from a dropper. So when people say magnitude 3s and 4s take stress off of the fault, it's nuts, because it's a drop in the bucket.
It's not enough to actually do something. So that's a false sense of security that we gain from that.
Because those small ones really are triggers that could cascade into a larger event.
So my question would be then, is at what point going up that scale do we start to see property damage and injury? Anybody want to venture a guess on that?
Well, it depends on how close you are to the epicenter, but if you're right on it, then a magnitude 5.
Okay, that helps understand things. Our earthquakes,
and in reference to the Wasatch Fault, the 7 magnitude we know is going to do significant damage in thousands of buildings collapsing, thousands of injuries and deaths. So a magnitude 7 or larger will have significant damage.
Which is it's why the Wasatch Front is usually the focus of this conversation, and I think that's kind of what we're looking for, is to kind of realize that there is more.
If you had a
beyond
magnitude 7 in Richfield, what would be the devastation?
It would be significant. We have many, many buildings that are really old. A lot of the even Main Street in Richfield, a lot of the main businesses up and down Main Street are at least 50 years old. So the damage would be significant. We have a few larger buildings, not many, and those have been built under a seismic code, but widespread damage to local businesses and homes throughout rural Utah.
Would the per capita damage in a rural community that hit a magnitude 7 be significantly higher than along the Wasatch Front?
Your population is spread out a lot more usually in rural areas, though, so it's not so centrally located as it is along the Wasatch Front. And as Ron said, it depends on how close you are to the epicenter, where that damage can occur.
But most of the homes that have been built in these rural areas are very old. Mm-hmm. And that would be one of the things that could affect the per capita death toll or damage toll, is that many of them were built before seismic codes.
And we discussed before, a lot of the materials that we used to build these houses were sandstone foundations, masonry, brick masonry. A lot of the older homes will just crumble, really, depending on the magnitude of the earthquake. The stick frame construction didn't come in until quite a bit later. A lot of those old homes are still standing, and they would be the most susceptible or vulnerable.
So do earthquakes shake differently? I mean, depending upon where they are and what the...
Yeah, earthquakes are just big sound waves, and they have different frequencies. It depends on what the geology is there. It also depends on how the earthquake ruptures. And so sometimes you'll have a high frequency event, sometimes you'll have a low frequency event, and depending on that, taller buildings will be more susceptible, or smaller ones will. And then if you have a liquefaction problem, that could cause other.
What kind of geology is liquefaction a problem?
When the water table's high, so within like a meter or so, within 3 or 4 feet from the surface. So places where you can't have basements and so on are really susceptible.
He grimaced because most of the houses in my neighborhood don't have basements, because
the water table's
at 4
so
feet
high.
you start getting
That's
really...
right. That's where you need to worry.
And I would imagine, does that vary a little bit based on time of year, the susceptibility to that of drought
Somewhat.
years versus wet years? I don't know if that...
Okay, I think we've got everybody's attention. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to start focusing on what we can do to prepare. We'll be right back in just a minute.
In our world, the sun shines on high adventure, and new experiences are yours for the taking. And everything in you looking to play outside the box. Cedar City, it's time to play.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
Now, we're folks bound by traditions. Whether it's holiday time or vacation time, make sure that one of your traditions is a stop at the Creamery in Beaver, Utah. Delicious cheese direct from the factory, ice cream, tasty treats, crafts, and gifts of all kinds. And it's the perfect place to get a bowl of creamy mac and cheese. Start your new tradition the next time you're headed our way. The Creamery in Beaver, Utah. Farm, meet table. Welcome back to the county seat. We're talking about earthquakes. This should be making you shake in your boots, if not your chair. If it is your chair, then take shelter immediately. Anyway, I do want to talk a little bit about emergency response. And this is an area that is right up your alley and kind of up your alley. And you know, most people, they think emergency services, they think, oh, you know, my kid breaks his arm, or I got a fire in the shed outside, I can call 911, fire department will be there in 5 minutes, 10 if you live in Paiute County, and everything will be fine.
Right.
That's not going to happen in an earthquake, is it?
No, it's not going to be likely. We have 12 ambulances that are typically in service in Sevier County. Those are going to get strapped really fast. It's the conversation that I have with most when they ask me about preparedness and what they can expect and what sort of resources they expect. And we talk about 72 hours, and I usually try to convince them to at least be prepared for at least a week before somebody comes knocking on their door looking to help them out. Obviously, we would like to do that as quick as we can and quicker, but resources are scarce. We live in an area where populations are low and they're spread out. Tax bases are a little bit low, so it's harder to hire as many of those emergency services response personnel that you would like to have. And so we do the best with what we have, but it's going to take a while before someone can show up to help you out.
What are your priorities at the county? Well, I mean, if an earthquake hit, you would have to prioritize how your services would be rendered.
Absolutely.
What would be the first three?
Obviously, it'd be life safety. And then we'd go into incident, preservation to try, or incident stabilization, trying to stabilize, and then property values would be property would come in last as far as priority goes that way. But obviously, life safety would be our first priority.
So if your house comes down and you're trapped inside, I mean, this is a realistic question, needs to be asked. How long before somebody is likely to come along to see if you are okay and can get out?
It could be a while. That's part of what we're doing to kind of involve the community. At least in Sevier County, we've got volunteers. We're trying to implement a program right now of a rapid needs assessment throughout the county, so that the organizations, taking along the block captain mentality from back in the day, but where your neighbors go and check out, and we're hopefully going to utilize that as much as we can, the CERT.
Right. Yeah, and those are programs we try to promote statewide as well for all counties, all communities, to have that disaster assessment capability in place, to have local volunteer responders that will help neighbors out, that help each other out, community emergency response teams. In the emergency management world, all disasters are local. They start local, they're managed local, and they end local. But the definition of a disaster is resources are overwhelmed. As Cody was just describing, their resources will be overwhelmed, and so their next step is to ask for help from neighboring counties and then from the state through those emergency declarations. And then state resources will come into play, and if it is even too large for state resources, we start asking for other state assistance and federal assistance.
And on our end, we're always looking at it like if there's a big enough event and there's something that happens along the Wasatch front end down in our area, we don't count on any of those state resources coming to our area for quite a while. And so that's why, our campaigns are preparedness on a local level.
This is something we touched on before we got started. Ron, you can maybe help me with this. Is there a community that is insulated from the actual, somewhere in the state that's got a pretty low chance of being affected directly by an earthquake?
Well, most of the area that's east of the Wasatch Plateau.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, my next question, thank you for answering.
Very few people live.
Man, we should have rethought those plans. But my next question in conjunction with that is, if those communities east are insulated from the earthquake itself, is a major event on the Wasatch Front going to impact them?
I would say that it will. I mean, it'll impact us even because of the mass migration of people. If something happens, people are leaving the Wasatch Front. They're looking for somewhere else to go. They're coming to rural Utah for some place to be. They're looking for water. They're looking for sustenance, and quite frankly, that's what they're coming to us.
What would the egress possibilities be if you had a 7.2 shake on the Wasatch front?
You mean when we do?
Yeah. Okay. All right. When? All right. Thank you for bringing me back to my state of depression. No, when we have that kind of a shake, how much is egress going to be impacted? I would imagine the rail systems will be junk.
Yeah, I mean, there's many scenarios that you can look at, because it's not something we have to try to imagine. I mean, this has been happening for centuries, where it's been well documented, and you can go to Christchurch, where the earthquake wasn't even a 7, and they had buildings much like the ones that we have here, and there was a lot of destruction of just basic services, right? And here, what we're worried most about is the availability of water, because the water lines are probably going to be broken, especially if the valley tilts. Mm-hmm. The water lines run the wrong direction.
And I think that's kind of what leads to what you're talking about, though, is the status of infrastructure. I mean, if the infrastructure is fairly well sustained or not too badly damaged, that people can stay where they're at and take care of themselves until help arrives. I mean, this is where help will come first, to the larger populated areas, as far as the relationship to the earthquake. Outside help, FEMA help would come to the larger areas. The plan is where are the airports, where are the things where they can bring those things into. So people that may be leaving that area won't have access to that help that is brought into the area. But kind of the infrastructure, I think, will determine how quickly people are going to want to leave.
So basically, I have assumed from this portion of the program that self-reliance is going to be the key, and when you said water, that becomes something that most people aren't thinking about they need to. I would like to talk about preparation when we come back for a final segment of the county seat.
The Utah Farm Bureau began as a collection of farmers supporting each other to raise the food we enjoy. Today, Farm Bureau membership encompasses everyone, whether ranchers, growers, or just everyday folks like you and me. Members enjoy discounts on items like vehicles and ATVs, or insurance that's very affordable. You don't have to be a farmer to join, and dues are small, but together we make a big difference in keeping our food supply local and abundant. Join Utah Farm Bureau.
Exploring is an innate part of being human. What if there was a place on Earth that explores your sense of touch, sound, breath, sight, all year long? So take your time and make it monumental. San Juan County, Utah's Canyon Country, is the place to explore your sense of adventure.
Welcome back to the county seat. We've been talking about the likelihood of an earthquake, or the eventuality of an earthquake. I'd like to spend the rest of the show kind of bringing you back out of despair and talking about preparation, things you can do. How hard is it to get ready, Ron?
Well, it's not hard. Most of the hazards come from falling objects, potential falling objects, and most of those can be secured. It's not very easy to do anything about a home where it's structurally unsafe, but the non-structural parts of the home, the potential projectiles and falling objects, can be secured. Just like hanging, anybody who's hung a big picture on the wall and had to find studs and put screws into those studs can secure a bookshelf, or can secure a big grandfather clock, or things that are going to fall in front of doors that won't allow you to escape, or things that are going to fall on people. I did my house in 3 hours, and it cost me less than $50.
Okay, so like pianos and curios and cabinets and grandfather clocks and big pictures and...
Well, even thinking about people's offices,
Yeah.
Especially where they have a lot of big shelves and books, and that big crystal award that you got that you're so proud of that could fall and hurt you. Those are the kind of things that you can secure to those.
So what do you do to a trophy? You glue it to the shelf or what?
Velcro. Or I don't
No, you get museum putty. You put it on the bottom, you turn it, it's not going anywhere.
Just so that it doesn't slide.
We have a YouTube video.
Cool. I'm going to find out. I want that information so we can share it.
And we call this a home hazard hunt. What he's describing is going through the house and looking for those things that are hazardous or could be dangerous during an earthquake, moving heavy objects from high shelves to low shelves, fastening tall furniture to the studs in the walls using L brackets or the nylons. One of the first things you want to look for is your water heater. Is it fastened to the wall with a kit or simply plumber's tape to keep that from falling over, breaking your gas line, leaking out valuable water that you may have there? These are things that we do before the earthquake. When do we don't know when the next earthquake's going to hit, so we need to be doing these things now to make our homes safer. But during the earthquake, maybe even a little bit more importantly, is knowing how to survive the earthquake, those falling objects and things, and we call that protective action: drop, cover, and hold on. And that's what we emphasize during the Great Utah Shakeout and in all our outreach efforts, knowing the protective action, how to survive: drop, cover, and hold on. Get underneath a desk, a table, a chair, hold on till the shaking stops. If you're inside, stay inside, or if you're outside, stay outside. Don't run into or out of a building when bricks and chimneys and glass and porches might be falling around. If you're driving, just try to stop on the side of the road, not on a bridge or under an overpass or under power lines. So those are the ways that we survive the earthquakes.
Okay, and I wish we could survive the half hour. We've kind of run out of time. So I do want to end up and wrap up this program by just saying, how do we get more information? Links.
BeReadyUtah.gov. We've got all kinds of earthquake preparedness information there, disaster supply kit list, water storage information, communications plan, how are you going to communicate with your loved ones after an earthquake hits if the phone lines are down. All of that is at BeReadyUtah.gov.
You got a contact for Richfield?
Well, I was going to recommend you get a hold of it or find your local emergency manager, the local CERT programs, find out how you can get involved that way and volunteer, and we use the Be Ready Utah program as well.
Excellent. Okay. And can that video be found on his site?
No.
Okay.
He doesn't have the stuff that we show on how to secure a home.
Okay. Well, I'm going to post that. So go to our website and find that out. Thank you for joining us. There's a lot to share here. Please do. We'll see you next week on the County Seat.